Good evening. The reading today comes from the book of Jonah. It's chapter 4. It can be found on page 929 in the Church Bible. That's 929, and is on the screens behind me. So that's Jonah chapter 4, Jonah's anger at the Lord's compassion. But to Jonah this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord. "Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live." But the Lord replied, "Is it right for you to be angry?" Jonah had gone out and sat down at a place east of the city. There he made himself a shelter, sat in its shade, and waited to see what would happen to the city. Then the Lord God provided a leafy plant and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about the plant. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm which chewed the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, "It would be better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" "It is," he said, "and I'm so angry I wish I were dead." But the Lord said, "You have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" And this is God's word today.
Wonderful. Please do take a seat. And if you've got a Bible in front of you, that'd be great to keep Jonah chapter 4 in front of you, either in a printed book, old school, or in an app on a phone or something, just so you've got it there to hand. As we look at these opening 4 verses together of this chapter that was read by Maria so ably a moment or two ago. Thank you, Maria, for doing that for us. And we're going to dig into this, and I hope it will challenge the way we see things a bit. You know, these sort of visual things that you get sometimes, that optical illusions that challenge the way you think. If I were to ask you which of those orange circles is bigger, which one would you say? The one on the left? Or it's a bit like being at the opticians, isn't it? Is it number 1 or number 2? Is it number 1 or number 2? Which is it? Left or right? They're both exactly the same. I got a ruler out and measured it just to make sure I wasn't telling lies in front of you all this evening. And this sort of thing that you see, don't you? This is sort of screws with your head. They're 2 normal-sized people. It's not been photoshopped at all. It's just the angles of the floor and the ceiling that are cut. They're all intents and purposes, it could be a father and daughter, but a grown man and a growing child. And it messes with the way you see things and messes with your sense of perspective. And we're going to spend some time just looking into this angry prayer of Jonah at the beginning of chapter 4. And I hope that God will help us to see things perhaps a little bit more clearly, to see him, to see ourselves and our own heart, and to see others with that true sense of God-given perspective. Because to all intents and purposes, it's a huge story, isn't it? We've seen it over the last few weeks. Jonah is a big story. There's a lot of big stuff going on. The word great, if you've been here tracking with us every week, there's lots of great big events going on. We've got a great city in Nineveh that Jonah was sent to. We've got then him running in the opposite direction, and a great storm and a great wind being sent to arrest him and to bring him back. And as he was thrown into the water, a great fish prepared by God to swallow up Jonah and to throw him back onto the dry land, to sort of appease the fear, to calm the great fear that the sailors had in the boat. And behind it all, we've got a great God, a bigger God, planning and orchestrating and moving people and events around for the good of lost people and for the glory of his name. And the challenge for us, for our perspective, is has our vision of God grown too small? Has our view of ourselves become too inflated and too self-important? Has our view of other people become, well, it's just too much of a challenge. God could never rescue them. So I pray that our perspective will be challenged as we come to this. As we come to this, really what is the heart of the book. These few verses that we've got in front of us this evening, verses 1 to 4, fill in for us so much of the background that's happened in chapters 1 to 3. We're given some of the reasoning, some of the thinking in Jonah's head as to why he ran in the opposite direction in the first place. And it's a surprise to find him at this point so angry. As Martin helped us last week in chapter 3, we get to the end of chapter 3, and it's a great ending. It would make a great ending to the book, actually, but it doesn't. Chapter 4 rolls on, surprisingly, because the end of chapter 3 is a brilliant sort of climactic ending to possibly the worst assignment that you could ever be given. Nineveh wasn't a barrel of laughs. The city that he was sent to wasn't going to be a whole heap of fun. Nahum, who's slightly later than Jonah, just a couple of pages over in your Bible, he's sent with a prophecy concerning Nineveh. And he's sent to challenge and to preach again to Nineveh and against Nineveh. And this is how he describes that city, the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims. Not the sort of place you want to be sent to preach a message of judgment, a message of warning. And yet, the end of chapter 3, where Martin left it last week for us, when God saw what they did in Nineveh, how they repented, how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and didn't bring on them the destruction that he had threatened. We're told a little bit later in the book, there's 120,000 people in this city, and God turns his anger away from them. Now, preachers would give their eye teeth for a response like that, wouldn't they? I mean, those of us who stand on the platform, we wouldn't mind one or two people just saying how the message had impacted them or how God's word had affected them. And it's lovely when you do, but 120,000 people. William Carey was sent to India in 1793. He's called the father of modern missions. He laboured for 7 years in India, 7 years to see his first convert, just one. Adoniram Judson went with his wife Anne to Burma in the early 19th century, 1812, 6 years to see his first convert. And after 40 years labouring in Burma, there were just 100 Christians. And here's Jonah. This should be his Glastonbury headline set, title-winning, gold medal podium mic drop moment. What happened? 120,000 people saved by my preaching. This should be the high point of Jonah's career. And where do we find him? To Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. In fact, the original language is even harder than that. This evil to Jonah was a great evil. This is not just anger. This is, God, you've got this badly wrong. This is evil. It's quite shocking and stark, isn't it? We come to this beginning of this chapter, and he's so angry. We read it that he's got this second of 3 death wishes in the book. The first time he wants to die, he wants to be thrown into the water. That's certain death, isn't it, in the storm? Here, he's angry with God. He wants to die, and that's repeated a little bit later on in chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. He wanted to die. It would be better for me to die than live. I'm so angry. I wish I were dead. Why so angry? Underneath this, there's that sense of, if you let those people live, well, what's it all about? I might as well die. What's the point, God? It's evil. You've got it wrong. And it begs these 2 questions that we're just going to spend a bit of time digging into together this evening. The first one is this: why so angry? Why so angry with such a God as this? He arrived, he preached, he went out of the city, as we read on in verse 5, and sat down at a place east of the city and made himself a shelter. He sits in the shade and he waits to see it smoked, basically. He's waiting to see God act as he said he would, and he's fuming. He's absolutely livid. And verse 2 sort of fills in some of the details for us, this prayer. Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? You know, back at the beginning of the story, when we're told that he ran in the opposite direction to that which God had sent him, this is why. This is why. He said, this is what I said. This is why I tried to forestall. This is why I tried to prevent it happening by going in the opposite direction, because I knew you'd behave like this. I knew that you're a gracious and a compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. I knew you wouldn't go through with it, Lord. I knew it wouldn't be you. He hates here that bad people find mercy. To his way of thinking, bad people find God's grace, and they don't deserve it. Look what they've done. Look what they've been like. They don't deserve it. And if they're going to behave like that, and if they're going to live like that, and then just at the last minute say sorry and get away with it, why should I bother trying to serve God and go through all the hardship and all the tough things that I have to go through if all they do is just say sorry and that's it? He's fuming. Can you relate to that? Well, no, because I'm polite and I'm a Christian and I think of myself as quite a nice, but I could never say that about other people. Well, do you find it hard to forgive other people sometimes? When they wrong you and you feel that they've stepped on your toes and done something to offend or upset, it can be hard to forgive others, can't it? It can be hard when your life hasn't panned out in quite the way that you'd hoped. You know, the longed for and the hoped for event or thing to happen in your life hasn't happened, not in quite the same way. Or you're living with that sense of loss or disappointment or injustice, and your life just hasn't quite worked out the way you thought it might. And you might not say you're angry with God, but you know deep down there is that sense of, how could you? I think you've got this wrong, Lord. I think you might have made a mistake here. Or we watch the news and we see some of the hard things that we just keep getting thrown at us in our news media, war and abuse and disaster. And it just kind of, you think, oh, has God got it right? Stephen Fry, the writer, the author and television presenter, comedian, quite a famous interview he did a few years ago that many of you, I think we've used it as an illustration here before. He was asked, if you could meet God, if you were to meet God, if he exists and you were to meet him, what would you say to him? And basically Stephen Fry's answer is around that sort of stuff, looking at the world around him and the injustice and the abuse and that sort of thing. He said, I would ask him, how dare you? How dare you, God? You say you're a loving God, and yet you allow this to happen. How dare you? And that sort of attitude is the thing that's going on in Jonah's heart, underneath the surface here, that this mercy of God that's been shown amazingly to these undeserving people in Nineveh is what he finds objectionable. And that's shocking, isn't it? How could you? Why do you do it like this, Lord? How come? They deserve to be overthrown, and yet you treat them like this. This is what he's done. This is what he's done. Some of you are going to the beach and you'll probably draw a cricket pitch or a volleyball pitch or something on the beach in the summer. It's like Jonah stood on the sand with a stick and he's drawn a big circle around himself and he said to God, look, I deserve this. I deserve to be on the inside, but these people don't. They deserve to be outside. Look what they've done. City of blood, full of lies, full of plunder. They don't deserve it. 21st of December 1988 was my 17th birthday. I had a great day, a good day. I had my first driving lesson in John Harris's little blue Rover 200. He turned up at school and took me off on my first driving lesson. I managed to get it up to 80 miles an hour on the Silsoe bypass before he told me I ought to slow down a bit. But that evening on my 17th birthday, I was out in town with, there were no speed cameras in those days. You could get away with it. I was out in town with some friends that evening. And it wasn't the rolling news cycle like you get today. Yeah, I am that old. But news just started to filter in that evening that there had been a significant incident. An aircraft had crashed in Lockerbie, over Lockerbie in Scotland that evening. And Pan Am 103, 31,000 feet, 360 miles an hour had suddenly disappeared from the flight traffic control radar. And over the following hours that night, the next day, as you watch the news and listen to the news, the details became clearer. 243 passengers, 16 crew, 11 local residents on the ground, 270 people had lost their lives that night. Suzanne and I are watching the BBC documentary at the moment. Any of you watching it? It's a great watch. It's fascinating. It's obviously dramatised, but it's bringing back some of the details of those events. And I remember from the time, the shock of it hitting us. I'd flown on that route, the first part of that route, not long before. I'd been on a German exchange trip, and we'd flown from Frankfurt to Heathrow, where the bomb was smuggled onto the plane in Frankfurt to Heathrow, actually on that plane, on the very plane that went down in over Lockerbie, on the that one. I missed a slide. That one there. And I remember then, and the drama brings it out beautifully, the anger and the desire for justice for those that had lost their lives. How could it be this has happened? As it became clear that it actually wasn't an accident, that somebody was to blame, that the anger and the vitriol was thrown not just initially at whoever it was, the perpetrators, but as it became clearer that it wasn't just an individual terrorist group, but there was a nation behind it. A group of people became the enemy, whether they were guilty or not. And of course, not all of them were. But them over there, they became the enemy, and everybody was seething, were angry. As it became clear that Gaddafi and the Libyan government had become involved, and everybody got more and more angry with it. They didn't admit responsibility for 15 years. And even when they did, it was just in general terms, with no apology, with no remorse. And you could have sent, it's almost justified, isn't it, the anger in that point. Somebody must pay. Somebody has to be brought to justice for this awful act, this heinous act. And we sort of do feel a bit justified. Jonah seems like he feels a bit justified, doesn't he? In sort of trying to justify himself. This is what I said, Lord. But what's he doing? This is what I said, Lord, when I was still at home. What he's doing, me and I, and what I said. He's elevating his word and the way he's thinking against what? Well, against God's word. 1:1. The word of the Lord comes to Jonah, the son of Amittai. And as it's echoed in chapter 3, verse 1, the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. And he's saying, yeah, I know better than you. Yeah, you said that, but isn't this what I said? This is what I said to you, God. This is my word. I know best. You don't know what you're doing. His perspective is shot, isn't it? Who has the best perspective in that situation? Well, God does, not Jonah, doesn't it? And who has the best perspective for you and I when we struggle to forgive, when we find a particular situation incredibly difficult? Is it God or me who has the best perspective, the clearest perspective? When we put ourselves inside that circle in the sand and the other person outside of it, we're saying, mercy's great for me, but not for them. And the challenge, as we think this more deeply into our hearts, is who is that for you? Who is it for you that you struggle with? You'd actually be quite happy, quietly, if they did suffer a little bit, if stuff did go a little bit wrong for them, or if their life didn't quite go to plan. Who would that be for you? Who would you struggle to see blessed, to see promoted, to see kind of lifted up and celebrated? Who would you struggle in that situation to see? Because you see, there's this Jonah-ish heart in all of us. It might not be quite to this degree, this anger, this frustration, but there's a Jonah-ish heart in all of us. It's an elder brother-ish heart. We've commented several times that in Luke chapter 15, Jesus speaks a parable about two sons who lived in their father's home, and the younger one basically says to his dad, I want you dead, I want your money, I don't want you, I want your stuff. And he takes his inheritance, he goes off into a foreign country, and he squanders it in wealth and with wild living. And after he's spent it all, and he's got to the lowest point, he can't afford to eat, he comes to his senses and says, I'm going to go home, I'm going to apologise to my dad, and I'm going to ask him for the most menial, lowest job in the household, to be a servant. Anything's got to be better than what I'm doing at the moment. And he comes home, and his father sees him and runs and celebrates and throws a party. And the older brother, well, as he comes home after working hard in the field all day, he hears music and dancing, and he calls one of the servants and says, what's going on? And they say, well, your brother's come home and your father's thrown a party. And the older brother, he becomes angry. And he sits outside and watches in from the outside, waiting to see what's going to happen. And he refuses to go in. And his father goes and pleads and says, will you come? And he said, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitute comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. Does that describe you, your heart? Something elder brother-ish, something Jonah-ish in your heart to an individual or to a group it might be. It could be an individual. It could be a colleague who's wronged you, treated you badly. It could be an ex or a former friend. And you just find it really hard to find that space in your heart to forgive them. It could be a group, a people group, an organisation. Our world plays this sort of polarisation game so strongly, doesn't it? You know, politics, I think, is about where you see it the most clearly day to day. You're either left or you're right, or apparently now you're more right and more left as more faction groups and splinter groups kind of come off of the two main political parties. And if you're in this group, that's fine. But if you're over there, you can't even talk to you. You're cancelled. It happens with wealth. The ordinary working man in the street says those fat cats in the boardroom lining their own pockets at my expense. And the fat cats in the boardroom looking down on the working man and saying, if only they worked a bit harder, they could have a little bit more of what I've got. Who is it that you would struggle with? Who is that group for you? It might sadly be a national group, an ethnic group, a religious group. This is the challenge that Jonah puts right in front of us. If God were to say to you this evening, right, that person you've got in your mind's eye at the moment, you go to them. You go to them and you show them my compassion. You talk to them about me. Would you go or would you run? Why so angry with God? But God in his grace almost sort of tries to draw the sting from it a bit, doesn't he? Is it right, he says to Jonah, for you to be angry? That's our second question. Is it right that you're angry in that situation? And there's something here that Jonah knows this stuff in his head, but it hasn't affected his heart and impacted his heart. Some of you remember 15 years or so ago, 2010, we ran a series of events called A Passion for Life here in Bedford. We partnered with other churches across town. If you're around with us at that time, we had a week's worth of mission events in Bedford. One of them was an evening where we had interviews with Christians who'd got powerful stories to tell of their faith. And one of the guys that we invited to come was a man named John Mosey. John came and stayed with us for a couple of days at home. We got to know him really well. We got to know his story quite well. John was a minister. He was involved in Christian ministry. But his daughter, Helga, was on Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie. And he tells of that evening, watching the 9 o'clock news, as that was their routine, him and his wife and his son at home, knowing that they'd seen Helga off earlier that day and put her on the plane. And she was off to New York to perform in a concert in an orchestra. And he watched the 9 o'clock news with the horror just welling up inside him. That's not just any plane crash, that's our plane crash. That's my daughter. By day 2, these are his words, by day 2 there were already rumours that a terrorist bomb might have been the cause of the disaster. Some of the relatives were howling for blood, that somebody has to pay. When one early interviewer asked how we felt about it, we said that we readily forgave whoever was responsible. How can you forgive animals like that? The reporter asked. Animals like that. See, that's the thing, isn't it? Them over there. While I was trying to think of a reply, his wife cut in, well, Jesus said if we don't forgive those who hurt us, God won't forgive us. We're also sinners. We're trusting God for forgiveness through the blood of Jesus Christ. Sir, we just dare not play such foolish games as not forgiving. That's remarkable, isn't it? 2 days in, 48 hours after you've lost your daughter to a terrorist bomb. He said, I was still wondering at my wife's answer when he shot another question at me. Hasn't this destroyed your faith? And he said, I'm amazed how I was able to answer, well, this is where we prove whether what we have preached and said we believe for most of our lives is real or whether it's just a game. Again, powerful words, isn't it? Has the gospel, this good news that you are forgiven by grace through faith in Jesus Christ, so impacted your hearts that it can impact those decisions and those situations? Or is it just a game? Is it real or is it just a game? Well, of course, it's real. But Jonah doesn't get it yet. Because he doesn't realise that circle that he's drawn in the sand rightly puts him outside of it. It puts all of us outside of it because none of us deserve that grace that God gives us. But of course, this mercy is real because it's cross-shaped. Jonah quotes in this little section of the prayer a kind of foundational text in the Old Testament in Exodus chapter 34 that underpinned the Old Testament people of God's faith. It underpins our faith as people today. In Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 and 7, as the children of Israel have been at Sinai, they've left their captivity in Egypt, they're leaving for the promised land, and they get to Sinai where God meets with them and gives them his law, how to live in relationship with him, with one another, with the world around them. And immediately they've broken it. They're sinful, rebellious people. They're worshipping a golden calf, even as Moses comes down off the mountain and the tablets get broken and Moses returns. Pleased with them. And God in his grace reinstates that covenant, those promises with his people. And he says, I'm going to pass in front of you, Moses, and I'm going to let you know who I am. I'm going to explain my nature, my character to you. This is what he did. He passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. But what basis do they receive that on? As God speaks to Moses just a few verses before, he says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to cause all my goodness pass in front of you. I'm going to proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. But he says this, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I'll have compassion on whom I will have compassion. Jonah must have known that. He's just quoted just a very few verses after that. Jonah would have known this. What basis do I receive God's mercy on? Because I deserve it? Because I've figured out a way to step over the line and into the circle myself? No. We receive God's mercy because God will have mercy on whom he will have mercy and have compassion on whom he will have compassion. Jonah's track record isn't great. Jonah's people's track record isn't great. There's a little verse in 2 Kings chapter 14 where Jonah is mentioned. The sort of situation he left in Israel was one where people were doing evil in the eyes of the Lord, not turning away from their sins. The Lord sees how bitterly everyone in Israel, whether slave or free, was suffering. There's no one to help them. They don't deserve God's forgiveness. And Jonah's own story, as we've seen it over the last few weeks, does he deserve God's forgiveness? He deserves firing. He certainly deserves a disciplinary of some kind, doesn't he, as a prophet, as a preacher. His obedience hasn't been great. He doesn't deserve it. His own story. Who is it that's saved in the story of Jonah? Gentile sailors, hardened working guys on the boats, and the great nation, the great city of Nineveh. Who's the person that's left angry, sitting outside, fuming and raising his fist at God? The prophet. He doesn't deserve God's mercy. It's only a right perspective of this big God, of his nature, of his compassion and of his grace, that will ever soften hard hearts. And we all need it, because that little verse in Exodus chapter 34 goes on to say this. The Lord is the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. But again, Jonah's missed this bit off. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. God will act. There will be justice. Evil will be dealt with one day. That's God's character. But for now, mercy is being shown. Compassion is being shown. Grace is being shown to people who don't deserve it. It's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Both of these things, both mercy and justice, are essential, aren't they? If things are to be sorted out and dealt with and dealt with properly, yes, those people do deserve to pay. Justice has to be done, but at the same time we need mercy because we're all guilty. We're all outside the line in the sand. And this is where Jonah helps us with this perspective that we need a God who is big enough to do both. We need a God who is big enough to figure out how these seemingly competing things of mercy and of grace and judgment and justice can coexist. And of course, it's at the cross, because Jesus comes as the true and better Jonah, who doesn't run away from us, but chose to run towards you. In all your sin, outside of the circle, in all of your rebellion, he chose to walk towards you. He knew the cost. Jonah says, I knew what was going to happen. Jesus knew what was going to happen. He knew where he was going. And yet he came anyway. John chapter 1, as that gospel that we looked at a few months ago opens up, tells us that Jesus came to his own, but his own refused him. They didn't receive him. But yet he came anyway. He came and faced down the greatest storm, not just a storm of waves and wind and of sea, but that storm of rejection from the people that he had made, that storm of rejection from his Father, that storm of God's wrath and God's justice on evil and on rebellion that fell on his own shoulders. He spent 3 days in the belly of the earth, absorbing that cost for you and me, and yet emerges victorious so that he can offer mercy and grace to people like us who don't deserve it. So the wonderful news of this little angry prayer at the beginning of chapter 4 is that whoever you are in this room this evening, we're all outside the circle. But there is a way which you can come in. You can be welcomed in. You can find that mercy and find that grace as you turn to that Jesus who hung on the cross for you. It doesn't matter what your life has been like up to this point. It doesn't matter if you think you're further away than God than you could ever imagine. It doesn't matter if you turn around and say to me at the end of the service, but you don't know what I've done. You don't know what's in my heart. You don't know what I'm thinking. No, I don't. But Jesus does, and he died for you anyway. And what it also means is that people like us who struggle to see those that we place outside so readily saved, it means we can go. We can go confidently. We can go knowing that Jesus' compassion and mercy still would make room for many more to come to him. Who is it you've written off this evening? Where is your mercy and your compassion run dry? Let that amazing grace, that sweet sound that saved a wretch like me, that though we were once lost, we are now found. We were blind, but now we can see. Would you let that mercy and that greater and renewed and fresh experience of God's mercy and God's grace in our lives send us out to serve our great God?